one of the greatest, if not the greatest animated show of all time, or at least our generation, is now on Netflix in the United States. And for the first couple of weeks, it was #1 in the US. Out of all of the Netflix originals and the new shows, it has rekindled the flame that made it so special in the first place. So why does Avatar resonate not just with the generation that grew up with it, but it looks to be every generation has this love and fondness for this show. So in this series, we're going to be talking about every season of Avatar, and then on this channel, we're going to cap it off with an Avatar tier list. I cannot wait to get into all of those things, but today we are talking about Book 1 and what makes Book 1 so important. Because let's be honest, at least personally, when I think of The Last Airbender, I think of moments more often than not from Seasons 2 and Seasons 3. But without this stable foundation, without the events that happen in Book 1, we wouldn't have 2 and 3. Without the introductions to these characters, we wouldn't love them on the level that we love them. And without these seeds planted that are developed and expressed later on in the series, moments that are first mentioned at the beginning of Season 1 and come back around at the end of Season 3, without all of those things, I don't know if Avatar: The Last Airbender would work on the level that it does. The old saying, you have to walk before you can run. And I understand why some people look at Season 1 and say, well, it's just not as good. It's not as serious as the other 2 seasons. And some of the humor is a bit childish, is a bit over the top. And I can see where you're coming from that perspective, because it does take a couple of episodes to find its groove and to understand what it is, but there are still seeds planted in those episodes that mean so much to fans and that give you characters that everyone loves. I mean, come on, where would we be without the Cabbage Man, okay? One of my all-time favorite characters. Oh, and keep in mind, within this review, there will be spoilers for Avatar: The Last Airbender, but let's start out with what makes this show so incredible in the first place, and that is the characters. And it's so incredible to see where the character of Aang ends up and the growth that he has. In my opinion, one of the greatest character arcs I have ever seen in animated form. But we basically start out with Aang as a typical kid. Granted, a powerful kid, okay? And he becomes that later on. But he just has this childish enthusiasm where he wants to make stops along the way on their journey. He starts out saying, hey, I just want to go penguin riding, okay? That's why I'm here. And while Sokka and Katara have quirks of their own, especially Sokka, you can tell that they're a bit older and a tiny bit more mature than Aang, especially with what they had to go through within their village. Something that is mentioned at the beginning with what happened to their parents. It's maybe not as explored as one would want it to be, but once again, those seeds are planted for you to learn about what you need to learn about, and then later on in the series, those things come back to haunt them, especially Katara. But then we look at the other side of the story and we see Prince Zuko, a man driven by anger and rage, cast out of his father's presence, banned from the Fire Nation. He has one thing to prove, and that is his worth to his father. The only way he can do that is if he retrieves the Avatar. Now, first of all, you gotta find the Avatar, okay? He's been gone for 100 years, but all of a sudden, he encounters what he never believed he would, and that is Aang. Now, one of my favorite elements of Avatar is the parallel between Prince Zuko and Aang. Both very similar characters when you start to peel back the layers, but no one really understood at the beginning how much they would truly flesh that out. Honestly, no one knew Zuko was going to convert in the way that he did. But in Season 1, Episode 12, we see how similar their stories are. Aang reliving the events after finding out that he is the Avatar 100 years ago. And then Uncle Iroh hearing the crew talking bad about Zuko, putting them in check by telling the story of how he got his scar and why he was actually banned. See, Zuko and Aang are both men on a mission. Aang's mission to defeat the Fire Lord, we find this out in episodes 7 and 8, Winter Solstice Part 1 and 2. When Aang enters the Fire Nation for the first time, they make it to that temple. He encounters Avatar Roku, and he tells him, listen, there's a comet coming to Earth, and once that comet gets here, it is too late, so you have to defeat the Fire Lord by the end of summer. Talk about stakes being high. We look at Zuko's mission. Zuko has to prove his worth by finding, retrieving, and bringing in the Avatar. And he has multiple chances within this first season to do that, but there's always a still small voice speaking to Zuko, telling him maybe what you're doing is not right, even with all of the anger and the fury. And it's incredible to see in an animated show that I don't think anyone expected to have the impact that it does with its characters. With a character like Katara, who grows so much within the first season, going from barely being able to bend water to a legitimate waterbender, with Aang, of course, because that's the mission that he's on. And while we don't fully explore what Sokka is capable of in Season 1, he is always hungry, and I can resonate with that. He does manage to get our crew out of situations quite often, not as much as later on in the series, but Sokka is smarter than people give him credit for. And not only do those moments with the characters come back around later on in the series, but it's also the seeds that are planted within this season that I don't think enough people give it credit for, myself included. It took a rewatch of this season to confirm multiple elements for me. One of those elements being seeds are planted that are basically sparking a rebellion all across the world. And a lot of it comes down to the fact that they're just seeing the Avatar and his existence, right? You have Haru the Earthbender and his village, who has always lived in fear under the reign of the Fire Nation. The Avatar and really Katara sparks that rebellion, and we see that come to play later on in the series. You have Kyoshi Island and the Kyoshi Warriors not only coming into play later on in the series, but they also got their own spin-off comic book. How cool is that? You have one of my personal favorite episodes when they travel to the Earth Kingdom for the first time. They meet King Bumi, and he challenges Aang both physically and intellectually, and you learn that there is more to this guy than you think. He's not just some kooky old man. Okay, he is, but he's also an incredible earthbender. But planting these seeds in everyone's head, sparking these mini rebellions all across the earth, some of the stories at times did run a tad bit off course. You see the show and its quirky elements at play here in a major way in Season 1, whereas later on, you realize that it's a much more serious show. It's not just a show for kids. Now, there are small segments within Season 1, especially within the final couple of episodes, that tell you, okay, these characters are more than what they seem on the outside. Sure, there is comedy, sure, there is humor, and at times that was maybe over the top in Season 1, but it does not compromise the emotion that you get from these moments, especially in the Siege of the North Part 1 and 2. We have Katara finally mastering her waterbending, Commander Zhao planning to siege on the Northern Water Tribe, Aang slowly mastering the Avatar state, and of course everything going on within Zuko's journey, and Uncle Iroh, who is always the wise and calm presence. Now, I will talk about him much more when we talk about Seasons 2 and 3, but he is one of my personal favorite characters, and I cannot wait to explore his impact on this show, an impact that I think a lot of people get, but not everyone realizes how important he is to Avatar. And this is the kind of show that you get when you plan ahead. See, often we see shows, mostly in live-action form, but shows that have so much potential but they fall flat because there is no set goal. There is no end game. There is no plan. With Avatar, they knew exactly what they were doing from beginning to end, and because of that, we can have tie-ins, we can have elements that come into play later, we can have these moments that resonate with us so much and stick with us from season to season, and it doesn't have to be longer than it needs to be. A complaint that I had when Avatar first ended, and this was mostly because I was heartbroken that was all we got, is that, hey, I just want more. But you know what? I love the fact that we get a concrete ending for this character at the end, but it all comes back to what happens in Season 1 within these characters, and really the emotional moments that we see, like when Aang travels back to the Air Temple for the first time in 100 years and sees what actually happened when the Fire Nation came in and took them all out. Now, he says in the show, if I was there, I could have done something to stop it, but it's almost as if fate stepped in and said, hey, you should not be here. You're not ready to take on the Fire Nation. So maybe if Aang was there, he would not have made it out, and he wouldn't have had the chance to become the Avatar. A show like this makes you think not only about fate, but about destiny. His destiny is to save the world, and because of that, sometimes things happen that don't seem right at the time, and we see that parallel with Zuko as well. And the first real conversation that we get between the two is when Aang tells him, you know, if the world worked differently, we could be friends. I was friends with members of the Fire Nation way back when, and at that point, Zuko shakes it off, but I am sure something that Aang said resonated with him, because that's when we saw the confliction start. That's when Zuko really started to look inward and say, hey, maybe what I'm doing isn't the right thing to do. Now, even though Season 1 is my least favorite season, and like I said, not every episode works to the level that it wants to work, but almost every Season 1 of a show like this is trying to find its way. Some of them do, some of them don't. Obviously, Avatar, as it progresses, it gets better and better, and I do think it found what it was intending to be by the end of this season, But overall, the stories, the seeds planted, the moments that come back into play are all even more important than I realized. I needed this rewatch. I am appreciative of Netflix finally putting Avatar out there for us to see in the United States, but I need your comments down below. How do you feel about Book 1 of Avatar: The Last Airbender? Is it your least favorite? Do you agree, disagree with me? And if you enjoy this series and you want to see me cover books 2 and 3, be sure to smash that thumbs up button and let me know how you feel about this show, and let me know if you're excited for more coverage and content on this channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, listening. This was my review of Avatar Book 1. Book 2 is coming very soon.